Jack's shuttle shook hard as it dropped through the storm. Snow slammed against the glass like bullets, and red lights flashed inside the cockpit. "Come on, hold together," Jack muttered, gripping the controls. But it was too late. The shuttle spun, then crashed into the frozen ground with a loud roar. When he opened his eyes, everything was silent. The power was out. The cold air was creeping in. Jack's hands were shaking. But he was alive outside. It was nothing but white and endless field of snow and wind. He grabbed his emergency kit, wrapped himself in a heat cloak, and stepped outside. The snow was deep, and the air was thin. He had no idea where he was, only that no help was coming soon. He needed shelter, or he would freeze to death as he pushed forward through the ice fields. He saw something strange ahead. It was a small shape, half buried in snow, not moving. At first, he thought it was an animal, but as he got closer, he saw fingers, delicate, blue-skinned fingers. It was a girl, an alien girl, barely alive. Her clothes were thin, her lips were blue, and her eyes were shut. Jack dropped to his knees beside her, checking for signs of life. She was still breathing, but barely. "Hang in there," he whispered, pulling her into his arms. She was ice cold, and he knew she wouldn't last much longer in this condition. He looked around, saw a small cave not far away, started walking toward it. The wind tried to push him back, but he kept going inside the cave. It was dark, but safe from the wind. He placed her gently on the ground, then opened his heat cloak and wrapped it around both of them. It was the only way to warm his body heat. It felt strange, being so close to someone he didn't know. But there was no other way. Slowly, her breathing became steady. Her body stopped shaking, and a little color returned to her face. She opened her eyes for a second, looked up at him, then passed out again. Jack stayed there all night, holding her close, keeping her alive. In the morning, he heard voices outside the cave. Shadows moved. In the snow, tall figures with glowing eyes and tribal armor. They spoke in a language he didn't understand, but they looked at him with surprise, then anger. They pointed at the girl in his arms, then at him, then at each other, whispering something fast. The girl woke up and saw them. She said something in a weak voice, and the warriors stepped back. One of them nodded slowly, then dropped to one knee. Jack was confused. Why were they acting like he was important now? The oldest warrior stepped forward and spoke in broken human tongue. "You have touched her," he said. "You have saved her." Jack nodded. "Yes, I found her in the snow. She was dying." The warrior's face turned serious. "Then you must take her, by our law." "What?" Jack blinked, confused. Another warrior said, "You shared warmth, flesh to flesh. That means you have claimed her purity." Jack stood up quickly. No, I was just trying to save her life." But the warriors didn't seem to care. The guru looked down, ashamed. Jack could see it in her eyes. She knew this would happen. She didn't ask for it, but it was their tradition, their law. Now, because of what he did, they believed she belonged to him. He wanted to explain, to shout, to tell them this was madness. But then he saw the fear in the girl's eyes. If he said no, if he rejected her, it would bring her shame, maybe even exile. She might survive the cold, but not her people's judgment. Jack didn't know what to say. He looked at the girl, so fragile, so young, and completely silent. She had no choice in this, and maybe now, neither did he. The warrior nodded. "You come, ceremony soon," before Jack could protest. They helped him and the girl walk through the snow. The storm had ended, but something much bigger had begun. Jack had only tried to save a life, but now an alien law had made him part of something he didn't understand. He looked at the girl beside him, her hand gently holding his, and deep down, he knew this was only the beginning. The walk through the snow felt longer than it really was. Jack didn't speak. And neither did the alien girl. Her small hand stayed in his, soft and cold. The warriors around them were silent too, but their eyes watched him closely. It was clear he was no longer just a visitor. He had become something more to them, something dangerous or sacred. He couldn't tell which. They reached a strange village hidden between cliffs of ice. Huts made from fur, bone, and glowing crystal circled a tall stone tower. Alien children peeked out, curious but cautious. Old women whispered from the shadows, their eyes sharp like knives. Jack was led into a warm hut, its ceiling low and filled. With hanging herbs, the girl was taken to another room, and a male elder sat across from Jack. He poured a thick blue liquid into a stone cup and handed it over. Jack refused, still confused and on edge. "I think there's been a mistake," he said, trying to explain. "I didn't mean anything like that." The elder only nodded slowly. Then replied in broken English, "You saved her," he said. "You touched her skin, shared your fire." Jack shook his head. "She was dying. It was survival." The elder gave a sad smile. "Yes, survival, but our law is old, deep. You are now her chosen, unless you shame her." Jack frowned. "What happens if I walk away?" The elder's smile faded. "She becomes broken. No one takes her, not even her own. She is pure, and now marked, not by force, but by ancient rule." Jack's stomach turned. "I don't want to hurt her." "Then do not," the elder replied, standing up and leaving the hut that night. Jack was moved into another shelter larger, cleaner, and filled with warmth. He sat by a glowing firestone, thinking, trying to make sense of what was happening. The door opened gently, and the girl stepped inside, wrapped in a silk-like robe that shimmered under the light. Her eyes met his, quiet, unreadable. She walked slowly, stopped near him, and then knelt on the floor. "I am Syria," she said softly, her voice like wind through leaves. "You are not of my kind, and you do not want this. But the law speaks." Jack nodded. "I didn't come to hurt anyone." "I know," she said, her eyes lowering. "But if you walk away, I will lose everything." He looked at her carefully. "Is there any way to fix this?" She shook her head. "Only by staying, only by taking what you now own." Jack stood up and turned away, rubbing his face with both hands. This was insane, brutal, like something out of an old Earth myth. But it wasn't a game to her. It was her life, her place in a world that had rules written in blood and honor. "You don't have to do anything tonight," he said at last. "I'm not going to touch you." Syria looked up, surprised. "But they will come in the morning." "They will check." Jack blinked. "They what?" "They will look for signs. They will want to see if it was done," she said, embarrassed but honest. "If they think you rejected me, they will call me impure." He sat down again, heart pounding. "This is so wrong." She nodded. "But it is the way." "I won't hurt you," he said, "but I'll stay close. We'll sleep here, near the fire." She agreed and slowly lay down beside him, keeping some space between them. He pulled the fur blanket over them both, careful not to touch her too much. The fire flickered softly as the wind howled outside. Jack couldn't sleep, not with all the pressure, the judgment, the fear, but Syria closed her eyes, a faint smile on her lips. She had expected pain, or shame, or command. Instead, she had found something, kindness. Outside, the village waited for the dawn. And with it, a test Jack didn't know how to pass without betraying himself for her. The fire burned low, and his thoughts grew heavier. In a land of ice, an unwanted bond had begun to melt something inside them both. But what it would become, neither of them yet understood. Jack opened his eyes just before the first light reached the sky. The fire had burned down to a warm glow, and Syria was still sleeping beside him. Her breathing was calm now, and her body no longer trembled from cold. She had moved closer in the night. Maybe out of instinct, maybe for warmth, but her hand was resting on his chest, and her head just below his shoulder. He didn't move, afraid that even a small shift would wake her. His heart felt heavy, not because of guilt, but because he didn't know how to protect her from her own people. He had seen war, loss, and betrayal, but never something like this. He had saved her life with a human heart, and now that heart was trapped in something that made no sense to him. Footsteps crunched outside the hut, slow and firm. Voices whispered. And then silence returned. Jack's eyes met Saria's as she slowly woke up. She looked at the doorway, then at him, and nodded. "They're coming," she said softly. He sat up to check. She didn't answer, but her silence said everything. There was a knock, soft but serious. Saria stood up quickly, fixed her robe, and gave Jack a look of silent trust. He nodded once, then lay back down and closed his eyes, pretending to sleep. She opened the door and stepped outside, her face calm and strong. Outside, 2 elder women and a warrior waited. One of the women whispered something in Saria's ear, then touched her arm. They looked past her, inside the hut. At Jack lying by the fire, a few glances were exchanged. Then the warrior nodded in approval. Jack heard it all, even though they spoke in their own tongue. Footsteps left the entrance, and the door closed once more. Saria returned quietly, her shoulders finally relaxing. "They believe," she said, sitting beside him. "No one will ask again." Jack looked at her, confused and a little surprised, but we didn't. "You know," he said. She smiled gently. "Sometimes belief is more important than truth here." "That's dangerous," he said. "Sometimes it's survival." She answered. He watched her for a moment, then asked, "Are you okay?" Saria nodded, then looked at the fire. "I feared pain or silence," she whispered. "But you gave me something else." Jack sighed. "I just want to help." "Not hurt you. You did help," she said. "More than you know," before he could speak again. The hut door opened again, but this time, without warning, a tall young warrior stepped in, his armor shining and face tense. His eyes locked onto Jack with cold hatred. "Vokan Sieria," whispered, her voice trembling for the first time. Jack stood up slowly, ready for anything. Vokan pointed a long finger at Jack and said something sharp in their language. Saria stepped between them, but Vokan raised his voice. She turned to Jack, eyes full of worry. "He has challenged you," she said. "He believes you stole me from him." Jack's brows raised. "I didn't even know you existed before 2 days ago." "It doesn't matter," Saria replied. "He asked for my hand before I was taken by the storm. He thinks you robbed him of honor." Jack looked at Vakun, then back at Saria. "And if I say no, he'll call you a coward," she said. "And they'll say you were never worthy." "What happens to you?" Jack asked quietly. Her lips tightened. "I'll be seen as unclean again, a prize fought over and thrown away." Jack turned toward Vakun, who had already pulled off his upper armor, preparing to fight. He sighed. "Then I guess I'm fighting." Saria's voice cracked. "Please be careful. He is trained." Jack gave a crooked smile. "I'm trained too, just not like him." Outside the hut, people were already gathering near the arena grounds. Drums echoed through the air, and word spread fast. The outsider would fight Vakun at dawn. Some watched with curiosity, some with disgust. Jack felt the weight of every eye, every breath, every step he took toward the center of the village. He wasn't doing this for pride or revenge. He was doing it for the girl who had never asked to be saved, and now needed saving all over again. The snow crunched under his boots as he stepped into the circle of stone. Vokin stood tall, his fists wrapped in cloth, his muscles tense and ready. The elder raised his hand and shouted a word that echoed across the ice. The fight was about to begin. Jack took a breath and whispered to himself, "I didn't come here to be a hero. But the truth was, someone had to be. The crowd fell silent as Jack stepped into the ring. Cold wind blew across the stone circle, but no one moved. Even the children stopped whispering, eyes locked on the two fighters. Volkan stood tall, his chest bare, muscles hard as rock. He looked at Jack like a predator sizing up weak prey. Jack didn't remove his coat, didn't puff his chest, he just watched the ground. The space, the eyes around him. This wasn't just a fight, it was a trial, a trap, and a message, all in one. They didn't care about truth, only honor, and honor had sharp teeth here. A sharp bell rang, and Volkan charged without warning. His first swing came fast. Almost too fast. Jack ducked just in time, the fist brushing past his head like wind. He rolled aside and got back to his feet. No time to think, just move. Survive, protect. The next hit landed, a solid punch to the ribs. Pain exploded through Jack's side, and he gasped. He had trained for combat, sure. But this wasn't a soldier's duel. This was raw and personal. Volkan smiled, showing sharp teeth. "You are weak," he growled. "She deserves strength." Jack didn't reply. He waited, circled, breathed. The alien moved like a dancer, fast and wild. But Jack noticed something: his feet were too quick. He was all speed, no patience. Jack let him throw 2 more punches, both barely missing. Then, using the force of Volkan's own step, Jack twisted his body and pushed forward. The alien stumbled, surprised, and Jack used the moment to land a solid hit to the back of his knee. Volkan shouted in pain and dropped for a second. Gasps rose from the crowd. And Syria covered her mouth in shock. Jack stepped back, not pressing the attack. He could have kicked him again, maybe won it right there. But he didn't. He just waited. Fists still up, body shaking from cold and pain. Volkan stood up, breathing hard, fury in his eyes. He lunged again, but this time Jack was ready. He ducked, slid under the swing, and jabbed the alien's shoulder with a stun pin hidden in his wrist. It didn't knock him out, but it sent a jolt through his body. Enough to freeze his movements. Volkan fell to the ground, twitching, groaning. Fists still clenched but helpless. The crowd froze, uncertain what they had just seen. Jack didn't raise his hands. Didn't celebrate. He walked to the center of the ring and spoke loudly. "I could have hurt him more. I could have ended this, but I won't. I didn't come here to take anything," he said. "I came here because someone needed help." The elders whispered, murmurs spreading like fire. Syria stepped forward slowly, her eyes wet but shining. Jack turned to Volkan, still on his knees, and offered a hand for a long moment. The young warrior just stared at it, his pride burning. Then, finally, he took it. Jack helped him stand, and Volkan whispered something in his own tongue. Syria translated, "He says, he has lost, but not without respect." Jack nodded, then turned to the elders again. "Do I have to keep proving myself?" T asked, voice calm but firm. The oldest elder stood, looked at Syria, then at Jack. "You fought not for yourself, but for her," he said. "You have passed a greater test." People began to bow their heads slowly, a quiet sign of respect. The challenge was over. But something had shifted. Jack was no longer just a stranger, not just a human. He was now something else: a protector, a warrior, maybe more. Syria walked to his side and took his hand. This time without fear. Her people saw it, and they didn't stop her. No one spoke, no one shouted. The cold air was heavy with change. Jack didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for tonight he had stood his ground, not for honor, not for pride, but for her, and that was enough. After the fight, the village remained quiet, not silent in fear, but quiet in thought. Jack had done what no outsider ever had. He had stepped into their ancient traditions, faced their strongest young warrior, and walked away with honor. Not by domination, but by restraint. The elders held a private meeting that evening. Behind closed stone doors, outside, fires burned in tall bowls. Lighting the center of the village in warm orange glow, Syria sat beside Jack on a carved bench. Her robe wrapped tightly, her fingers restless. He didn't speak at first, just watched the smoke rise into the cold sky. But he could feel the weight in her breath, the storm behind her eyes. "I thought they would hate you forever," she said finally, voice low. "They might still," Jack replied. "But now they'll think twice." She turned toward him, searching his face for something: kindness, truth, maybe a promise. "You didn't have to help me." She whispered. "I know," he said, "but I did." Footsteps approached, soft, careful, deliberate. It was the elder woman who had checked the hut that morning. She bowed her head slightly, then offered a silver cup filled with steaming blue water. "The elders will allow you to speak at the right of choice," she said. "It begins at moonrise." Jack blinked. "What's the right of choice?" Syria answered for her. "It is the final step, if you speak the words." "And I do too. We are bonded fully." Jack looked away, heart thudding. "And if I don't?" "Then I am shamed," she said. "They will not exile me, but I will never be seen the same." He held the cup, its warmth soothing his hands, but not his mind. She wasn't begging him, not this time. She wasn't asking for a hero, just a choice. Not between love or rejection, but between staying and disappearing. The night came fast, and with it, the ritual. A ring of glowing stones was placed in the snow. Elders and warriors gathered around it. Jack stood on one side, Syria on the other, both dressed in ceremonial robes. Drums echoed softly, and a line of children carried small lanterns around the circle. An old voice rose from the crowd, chanting in the native tongue. It was the chief elder, speaking of honor, tradition, and the bond of rescue. Then he looked at Jack and spoke in broken English. "Outsider, your fire saved her life. Your hand shielded her spirit. Will you now take her in full bond, as tradition calls, and speak her name as your own?" Jack's throat tightened. He looked across the circle at Syria, who stood still as stone, her eyes calm, not pleading this time. He could see it in her face. She was giving him the chance to walk away. And in that moment, he realized it wasn't about rules anymore. It was about choice, not forced by law, but by meaning. She had stood beside him when others doubted, trusted him when no one else did, and he had come to respect her deeply. Not as a prize, but as a person. He stepped forward and said her name clearly. Syria. Gasps spread through the crowd. Even though the word was simple, the elder nodded. "Then speak the next." Jack looked at her and said slowly, "I choose you, not because I must, but because I want to." Syria's lips parted, breath catching in the cold air. Then she stepped forward, meeting him in the center of the circle. "I choose you too," she said, "because no one has ever given me a choice before." There was silence, not cold or empty, but full. The kind that held something new and heavy. Then the crowd began to chant, softly at first. Hands raised toward the stars, firelight dancing on ancient faces. The bonding was complete not because it had to be, but because it had been earned. Jack reached for Syria's hand, and she didn't pull away. Not as a girl forced into ritual, but as someone who had found strength through being seen. And for the first time since he crashed on this strange, frozen moon, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The stars looked brighter that night, as if the sky itself had witnessed something sacred. Jack and Syria stood in silence, still holding hands. Even after the crowd had begun to leave, neither of them rushed, neither of them spoke. It was no longer about fear, survival, or pressure from the tribe. Something had changed. Not just And the people around them, but inside both of them too, the elder approached with a gentle smile and a thick ceremonial cloth. He placed it around their shoulders, tying them together in a single loop. "It is done," he said. "You may now share one space, one fire, one path." Then he turned and walked away, leaving them alone in the circle of glowing stones. Syria looked up at Jack, her eyes reflecting the firelight. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Will you walk with me to the bonding tent?" Jack hesitated, not out of doubt, but because of everything that led to this moment. He nodded once. Yes. They walked together, joined by the cloth, step by step, toward the tent prepared for them. Inside, the tent was simple: soft cushions, warm furs, and a bowl of glowing blue fire. The air was sweet with the scent of flowers Jack couldn't name. They sat together near the fire, not speaking for a long time. The silence between them was not awkward, it was peaceful. They had both been through too much to rush now. Syria untied the ceremonial cloth and folded it with care. She placed it beside them, then turned to him. "I used to dream," she said softly, "of choosing someone, not being chosen by law." Jack met her gaze. "Do you still feel trapped?" "No," she whispered. "I feel free for the first time." He reached for her hand again. And this time she held his tightly. Her other hand touched his cheek, unsure at first, then firm. "I don't expect you to love me," she said. "I only want to belong beside you, not beneath you." Jack gave a small smile. "And I want you beside me, not behind me." There was no ceremony now, no crowd, no rules, just two souls sitting by a quiet fire. Learning to trust, Jack leaned closer, resting his forehead against hers. She closed her eyes, breathing him in like he was warmth itself. It wasn't about tradition anymore. It was about choice, respect, and connection. Their kiss was slow, unsure at first, then certain. Not one of demand, but one of shared understanding. When Syria whispered his name, it was not in fear or duty, but in peace. And when Jack held her close, he wasn't claiming anything. He was protecting something precious. That night, they didn't rush what came next. They took their time, learning each other like two languages, slowly blending. The tent stayed warm not just from the fire, but from the quiet bond forming between them. He didn't take her purity like a right. He received it like a gift. One freely given, not stolen, not forced. Outside, the stars kept watch. The village stayed quiet, and no one disturbed them, not because of fear, but out of respect. They had seen what real bonding looked like, and it was more powerful than any tradition. By morning, Syria was still in his arms, her head on his chest. The cold tried to sneak into the tent, but it couldn't break the warmth between them. Jack opened his eyes and saw her still sleeping, peaceful, safe, and in that quiet moment he knew he wasn't just surviving anymore. He had found something worth staying for. The sun rose slowly over the frozen village, casting golden light on the white fields. Inside the tent, Jack woke first, but he didn't move. Syria was still curled against him, her breath soft against his chest. He listened to it for a while. Peaceful rhythm of someone who no longer feared the world outside. The wind outside had changed. It wasn't howling anymore. It was calm. Like the land itself had paused to watch what would happen next. Jack gently brushed a strand of hair from Syria's cheek. She stirred slightly, then opened her eyes, sleepy but content. "I thought you'd be gone when I woke up," she whispered. "I'm still here," he said quietly. "And I'm not going anywhere." They shared a small meal by the fire, just fruit and warm broth. No servants, no robes, no rituals, just a people, beginning something real. When they stepped outside, the villagers looked up. Some nodded with respect. Others smiled. Even the children seemed different, less afraid, more curious. Va Kun stood at the edge of the training field. Arms crossed, Jack met his gaze, expecting tension, But the young warrior surprised him. The coon gave a short bow, low and steady. A warrior's apology. Without words, Jack returned the nod, and nothing else needed to be said. The elder called Jack and Saria to the high stone, there, before the gathered clan. He raised a staff carved with history. "You came to us as a stranger," the elder said, "and by law you were feared, but you did not take by force. You did not break by power, you healed." Saria stood beside Jack, her voice strong and clear. "I was given to him by tradition. But he gave me back my voice. I choose to walk beside him. And I ask that our path be honored, not by law, but by trust." There was silence, then slowly, hands lifted in the air. Not just the elders, but everyone's. It was their way of saying yes, not to tradition, but to change. Something new had begun in that village, something rare and powerful. The elders stepped down and placed a mark on both of their hands. Not a chain, not a brand, just a symbol of unity. Not ownership, but equality. And when Jack looked at Saria, he saw more than just someone he saved. He saw someone who had saved him too, later that day. They walked out to the ice fields where it all began, the spot where he had first found her, half buried in the snow. She knelt beside the frozen earth and touched it gently. "This place took everything from me," she said, "but it also gave me you." Jack knelt beside her, taking her hand. "And you gave me something I didn't even know I needed," he said, "a reason to stay." They stood together in that quiet, open space. No crowd, no fire, just snow and sky. And when they walked back, side by side, they didn't look behind them, because the future they were building was ahead, not in the past, not in old rules, but in every step they chose to take. Together, the stars returned that night, clear and endless above the village. And from that night on, the people told the story not of a human who claimed a girl, but of a man who refused to take and was loved for it. And of the girl who found freedom not by breaking rules, but by rewriting them with someone who listened.